Welcome to Swing State. I'm your host, Fox 8 senior political reporter Bob Buckley, and over these next 2 weeks, we're talking to the candidates for the office that a lot of people believe is the second most powerful in this state and most states, the job of Attorney General. Next week, we'll have Democrat Jeff Jackson, but tonight we have Republican candidate Dan Bishop. So welcome, thanks for coming in. You're a Charlotte guy, grew up down in Charlotte?
Thank you, Bob. Certainly did, grew up, went to public high school there, graduated from South Mecklenburg, went to University of North Carolina after that, undergraduate in law school, and practiced law for 29 years.
So I got to ask you then, how do you let your son go to NC State?
I've been very proud. Jack went to NC State, had a great 4 years there. He's now ended up in law school himself at UNC.
Made the transition, both great schools.
But his heart remains in Raleigh.
That's fair enough. We're fans of both of those schools. We're going to go back over your electoral history in a minute, but I think it's incumbent on me to ask right up front, why leave Congress and run for Attorney General?
It is an interesting question, Bob, because to the best of anyone's knowledge, I haven't really researched it to the hilt, but no member of the United States House of Representatives has ever left the Congress to run for a state attorney's general office.
In any state that you know of?
That's right. They've done it to run for governor or run for the United States Senate, but not for this. And in my case, I'm doing it as a matter of choice. I've got a safe seat in Congress. I could return there with little effort and stay another 5 or 10 years, and most do. I'm doing this not because it's easy, but because it's hard. Yeah. It is it's a tough, close race statewide, and it is because people are living in fear. Crime is on a sustained basis at 10-year highs. That is a result of, I think, an assault on the institution of law enforcement. Anti-police measures, the worst idea ever to emerge in American politics, in my view, was defund police. The attitude that goes along with that, and the involvement of prosecutors who call them Soros prosecutors, and other ways in which the law has been politicized.
Well, let's get right into that since you brought it up. There's the defund the police thing never got very far. My understanding is you're going to hear some people say crime is significantly down, but my understanding is there's 7,000 law enforcement agencies that stopped reporting their crime statistics during the pandemic and have not picked it up again.
That is correct. So the FBI has changed the way it takes crime reports, and that has fed a lot of jurisdictions. NYPD is not currently reporting its crime
New York,
statistics.
Chicago, Baltimore, 3 of the big cities that no longer report.
Right.
How do you have accurate statistics when you don't include those cities?
I don't think you can. And you also see as crime sort of grows and becomes more chaotic, people don't report crime as often. But even the point, there are quarterly tick downs in crime, but we haven't returned to pre-pandemic levels. And the surge that occurred, it wasn't coincidental. It was, and I think most people believe this. I believe it. Obviously, people argue. What about the pandemic caused crime to rise and stay risen over an extended period? It's policy. It is policy. It's a variety of woke policies. You said defund didn't get very far. Correct. Well, in some ways it did. In some ways it didn't. But it communicated a whole cadre of ideas about how we're going to approach crime. It's happening today in prosecutors' offices where they employ so-called restorative justice rather than impartially and consistently prosecuting crime.
All right, well, let's vet that a little bit, because I teach at High Point University, and I have to tell my kids some of the stuff I show them about you don't understand how big crime was in the 80s and 90s.
That's true.
The murder rate and violent crime peaked in 92.
Right.
But it partially came down over the next 25 years because we changed the way we policed. Do we need to continue to evolve the way we police? Because the old just hitting people over the head with a baton is not necessarily effective.
Well, and I don't know if that's a fair way to depict it.
Okay.
You are correct that in the 90s, what became very popular was the community policing model, the notion of broken windows, and the Bill Bratton book, and all. I read it when it came out.
And just so people know what that is, the idea there was you've got to take care of the little things so people feel generally safe in the community before we can tackle the big things.
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily here to advocate for a particular model of policing or think that that's the answer. What I can say is that law enforcement policing must be robust and present. The folks who think that we're going to, the evidence is in, Bob, for those who say we're going to radically alter in some way policing, we're going to put police on the defensive, we're going to intimidate police, we're going to throw police under the bus whenever an incident occurs, or a variety of other things. woke crime policy doesn't work. It is creating chaos. And in recent years, we've seen, because of this is a very tied together issue, because of the Biden administration border policy and the degree to which 10 million people have entered the country living in unstable circumstances, it feeds that problem as well.
And if you look at any statistic, the poorest communities, whether they be white, black, or Hispanic, they're the ones who most want the police.
And they bear the brunt when they are lost.
Exactly. They bear the brunt very much. Before we get deeper into prison policy and all that stuff, I want to get through some of those other things I mentioned. You were a member of the Mecklenburg County Commission starting in 2005 during a run of 22 years of Republican mayors in Charlotte. You left in 2009, and by the way, there hasn't been a Republican mayor there since. The city's changed.
It has, and so the urban counties in North Carolina have all become pretty reliably blue. Mm-hmm. I don't think that serves them in all cases, but I respect people's choices. So to your point, I served in local government for 4 years, was out for 6 years. Went to the State House and State Senate in 2014 and 2016, 18.
We have less than 2 minutes in this segment, so I want to touch on some of that. In the state legislature, you were involved with writing the Public Facilities Privacy and Security Act. A lot of people refer to it simply as HB2 or the bathroom bill. What's the background there? Because it wasn't the General Assembly just saying, let's find something to do here. You were reacting to something.
Well, right, absolutely. There was an ordinance in Charlotte that said the 10,000 businesses in the city of Charlotte could not have separate bathrooms for men and women. That's what it literally said. And I tried to dissuade them from that for weeks and maybe even months before they did it. So did the governor at the time, so did the Speaker of the House. But when they did it, the legislature reacted, and that became that notorious bill. But the same issue is with us today.
Was the key to that, though, the fact that the ordinance said private businesses are subject to?
Absolutely.
That you might have accepted it if it were just government businesses?
Well, I don't know precisely how it would have gone. You can rerun but I think they could have done any number of things. But that's right. It was a mandate on 10,000 businesses.
Would you do it again, or do you think in hindsight you could have done it differently or better?
Actually, the best way for that to be resolved, Bob, would have been for the Attorney General of the state to send a letter to Charlotte, say, you don't have the authority to act in this area. You don't have general legislative power to enact things about public accommodations and employment. The legislature does that. And then it wouldn't have happened, and we wouldn't have had any of that reaction.
And there wasn't a way simply to have it ruled unconstitutional by the state?
Somebody could have gone and sued over it. It could have been in another direction, also controversial.
All right, well, we're just getting started tonight. When we come back, we'll talk about whether the justice system that the Attorney General's in charge of overseeing really works. We are back with the Republican nominee for Attorney General, Congressman Dan Bishop, and we're going to talk about prisons and that type of thing in a minute. But first, one of the issues that voters say is most important in this election cycle is abortion, which is one on which one of the few, I think, where the Democrats have a significant advantage of those that voters say are the most important to them. What do you want to see North Carolina do in this post-Dobbs world where each state is now charged with setting its own abortion access laws?
You know, Bob, one of the very important facts about some of the offices that we have is that some make law, some enforce law. The General Assembly has acted in that area. They've done a moderate 12-week abortion ban. That's the decision of the General Assembly. One thing that's very important to me for this race is that the Attorney General enforces all of the law, all of the time. He's not a prosecutor, by the way. The DAs do that, but he handles mostly civil litigation. But that's what the Attorney General's job is. And so I'm pro-life, always have been pro-life. I have a solid pro-life record. But the General Assembly has decided what the policy will be, so mine is only to make sure that the law is observed in accordance with this term.
Because we have seen attorneys general in other states, and certainly in this one, where they say, I don't like that law, I feel it's unconstitutional. And if you're pro-life, but if this state says we're going to have access to abortion, you're going to defend that in court?
That's exactly right. Okay. And to that point, you're very on to what I'm suggesting, which is it's really important, that, and you're correct, we have seen a history in North Carolina, the last two attorneys general, who have consistently picked and chosen among laws that they choose to enforce. That's not only a bad idea, It is an attack on our constitutional order. Well, the executive positions must execute law. They can't nullify law that are made by the legislature.
Executive. Now, their argument was always, my first duty is to the Constitution. I feel this is unconstitutional, therefore I won't defend it.
Yeah, and that's kind of a little lawyer trick, Bob.
Yeah.
So what they can always say that, but there are situations in which something cannot possibly be constitutional. Yeah. And then there's far more commonly, you may have some extravagant argument that something's unconstitutional, but it probably isn't. Yeah. They would use any argument. Josh Stein and Roy Cooper would use the most extravagant arguments to say that, well, I don't like this, therefore I'm going to say it's unconstitutional. That's the kind of lawyer trick that people hate, and they justifiably should. That's not the job of the lawyer is to be of the Attorney General is to be the state's lawyer.
You know, I come from a family of lawyers, and they've told me there are no tricks. They never trick anyone. Thanks, that's what they tell me. Kidding. Lawyers do what lawyers have to do, I guess. All right, you're on the Committee for Homeland Security in Congress. Many of the same issues will follow you to an Attorney General's office if you win. How has your time in the committee informed about what you would want to do as Attorney General, what you'd want to see done? I know you're saying you don't make the law, but you can certainly advise on what you want to see done.
A great deal. And although we've started with this conversation mostly focusing on the most important aspect, which is criminal justice and keeping people safe, but there's a whole rest of the body of law. And what I've learned on the Judiciary Committee in Congress, or what I've had a front row seat for, and this is true of the criminal justice portion we've already discussed, but it extends beyond that, the politicization of law. I call it lawfare. And that term is, if you consider it in the broadest possible sense, where people use official positions and the mechanics of law to actually do something other than enforce law impartially and neutrally. They pick and choose. When Josh Stein and Roy Cooper, for example, fought against implementation of voter ID for more than a decade that it has been law, that's lawfare.
All right, but what about Homeland Security and what this says? I mean, law is going to come down and say the federal government said, President Trump has said if he's reelected, he's going to deport millions of people. Do you as Attorney General have to become part of that? Would you want to become part of that?
And so another aspect of what I've learned in Washington and serving those committees is that following law, and law is what secures our ordered liberty. And yes, every component has to work together. There must be tight collaboration between the top law enforcement officer of the state, the Attorney General, and the police leaders and the sheriffs and the district attorneys, and there is. By far, the overwhelming majority of the DAs and the sheriffs in this race endorse me in this race for Attorney General, by the way, because they know that I'm going to do that. We're going to collaborate tightly. And with state and local law enforcement and federal law enforcement. We ought to be cooperating with Immigrations and Customs Enforcement so that so that the feds can more readily remove people from the community who are here illegally.
Are there still walls up in that between communication law?
At present, we have an administration that has flouted law. Yeah. I mean, as the open borders policy that the Biden administration has pursued is not only a bad idea, it is brazenly against enacted law. Congress has issued detention mandate after detention mandate in statute. And Alejandro Mayorkas, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, who's responsible for all this, just issued a memo and said, we're never going to follow that.
You mentioned in speeches that you will always work to punish crime, is the phrase I think you used. Does the research show that the punishment, without whatever you want to call it, rehabilitation or some type of way to help people become productive citizens when they come out of prison, does that current system work?
Punishment for crime has a number of purposes. They teach you this in first-year law school, and I'm not sure I can name all four right now. But one's retribution, another one is deterrence, another one is incapacitation so that people can't continue to injure people. I think that's the most important one. Right. One of the other things that's been a woke crime policy is assaults on bail, or the so-called bail reform. They've had litigation where they've sued in North Carolina so you can't keep people or you can't do it the same way. And the Attorney General is responsible for defending that litigation. He caved. He threw in the towel on it.
Do we put too many nonviolent people in prison?
There is no mass incarceration crisis that has been described. That is a myth. But the other side of it is people who are violent must be detained. I just went to the funerals for the 4 police officers out of 8 shot one day, April 29, in Charlotte, by someone who had been charged multiple times without resolving those charges as being a felon with a gun, had eluded police multiple times, had absconded from his appearance requirements multiple times, and then he shows up and they go get him and he shoots down 8 cops. That can't happen.
Research from the North Carolina Sentencing and Advisory Commission said that 44% of people released from state prisons are rearrested within 2 years. Does that suggest we're not doing enough to help these people become productive citizens? Because a lot of people, when they get out, they're like, I can't get a job. No one wants to hire me because I have a record.
Parts of this are certainly true. For example, a lot of people in jail and prisons are drug addicted, and if they don't get treatment, they're going to reoffend because they're going to be driven to it. On the other hand, there are a lot of people who are just violent folks, and they have to be incapacitated. That's what the criminal justice system is for. Not to worry about so much about them, but to worry about the people they victimize and the survivors of crime.
But those two come together when they get out of prison, especially if you don't help them become productive citizens.
And you've got to consider both parts. But what has been slighted is not the rights of the people who are in jail, it's the rights of the people who are being victimized.
All right, we'll take another quick break, but when we return, we'll talk about why one party's had such a tough time winning this office in this state over the last century. We're back talking about the very important Attorney General race with Republican nominee Dan Bishop. And right before the break, we talked about how this has been kind of one-way traffic in this office for the last while. Republicans don't have a great record at winning the Attorney General's office. You mentioned that in your announcement video, in fact. Do you remember the last one?
Yeah, Zeb Walzer in 1896.
Right, 128 years ago.
That's right.
What's going on there?
Yeah. It's a hangover of the days when Democrats won all the offices. If you think about Roy Cooper was in that office for 16 years, Josh Stein's been there for 8. But what has happened in the most recent years, which are the most important, is that Republicans have been radically outspent in pursuing the office. And if only, like, the last guy was outspent 25-1 down the stretch in the third quarter, but he lost by only 0.2%, fewer than 14,000 votes out of 5.5 million cast. That was a huge factor in my deciding to leave Congress, because I knew that I could put the resources together to stay competitive. We'll win this race this year, I'm convinced, because the people of North Carolina want folks who are going to be tough on crime in law and order positions. Yeah, and this is, again, the top law enforcement officer of the state.
The last guy you mentioned is in our viewing area, Jim O'Neill from Winston-Salem.
Right, great guy.
Your opponent, though, as you just mentioned, he has a lot more money than you do. Is that going to be a problem?
My experience these days, Bob, is that Democrats always have a lot more than Republicans. And someday perhaps we'll have an opportunity to dig into Act Blue and understand why. There are... we have plenty to be competitive. He's got a massive television buy. We've got a pretty big television buy. I don't think we need to trade punch for punch, because the issues, and our polling data tells us, my anecdotal understanding of people tells me, my issues are the ones that are potent. People are fearful of crime, and they want that situation corrected. They want law enforcement to work effectively again, and they want to see it cooperate across, Attorney General ought not be separated from the DAs and the cops.
Yeah, history shows us that there's a certain level of money you need to be competitive, but once you pass that, it becomes issues, et cetera, and what's going on. And otherwise, Jeb Bush would have been the Republican nominee in 2016, and Hillary Clinton would have won the presidency.
And I would have never made it to Congress. In my 2019 special election, I was badly outspent, but we won. You
have said that you hold your fellow Republicans accountable to conservative principles. So what does that mean specifically?
And I don't even know if it's conservative principles as much as it is.
That's the phrase I think you used.
It probably is, and I certainly am a conservative, no doubt about it. And everything that I've said in this interview is conservative. But what it really means is there's too much standing pat. Congress is neutralized. One reason there's so many national battles that AGs are involved in settling, where agencies are overreaching their power, for example, is that Congress is sort of inert. And it's closely divided, but there's also, frankly, a lack of courage to go to the mat. And I've been one who has sought to shake up the House of Representatives in order to make it deliver for the American people. There are about 18% of the American people approve Congress. And if you're in that 18%, you probably don't think it ought to work differently. But the other 80%, 82% think it should. And I've tried to get there.
The truth on that is always, we like the old phrase, I love my congressman, I just hate all the rest of them. That's kind of been the way it goes. By the way, speaking to what you say, though, and I'll try to put this on my professional YouTube page, I'm sorry, my professional Facebook page so you can see it. Ben Sasse addressed exactly what you're talking about at the Kavanaugh hearings a couple of years ago, saying that Congress stopped doing its duty, which is, he called it self-neutering, which is doing the political work of the people. And when the Congress doesn't do it, the executive branch starts doing it when they're not supposed to be doing it.
I'll give you a classic example.
Yeah.
You got agencies that are talking about banning gas stoves. They're going to make a law, they propose, to ban gas stoves.
Well, it'll be a rule, right?
Well, that's what they did. So they call it a rule, but the law gets made by agencies. Right. That's not where law is supposed to be made. It's under our constitutional system, it's supposed to be made by the Congress. Do you think Congress would ever get away with banning gas stoves? Not on your life. And so that's the kind of thing, I mean, yes, Congress should assert itself, but it requires individual courage by leadership who say, look, when push comes to shove, we've got to tell the other side. In divided government, you're never going to get into anything if you signal in advance that you're going to give up entirely every time. You've got to set a priority and say, look, you're going to get some of what you need, but we're going to get these things done. We're going to begin to address, for example, a $35 trillion indebtedness. And I believe that we need to act and make a difference. I've always been unsatisfied standing pat and doing nothing. And I just won't do that there, and I won't do it here.
We don't see a lot of that. And I know you're running for Attorney General, but still, you're talking about Congress, and we don't see a lot of that. We don't see the side saying, all right, I'm willing to give up this if you'll give me that. Now, part of it is what's called regular orders out the window. No longer do committees do their job and develop a legislation. It's all done in the Speaker's office, and then they come out and say, here's what you're going to vote for.
And when we had the fight about leadership in early January 2023, it was about developing a specific agenda and getting people and getting moving and restoring regular order.
But let's get back to, again, the job you're running for Attorney General.
Yeah.
There's a decent chance that if you win, you're going to be dealing with a Democratic governor.
Yeah.
And that's not a done deal, but there's certainly that chance. Do people know, how do you work with a Democrat who you've criticized to the degree you've had to criticize?
I'm not troubled by receiving criticism or giving it. And here, Bob, this is something that's interesting, and again, it's a lesson from Congress for me. You see a lot of guys who say, well, I'm going to be a very centrist person so that I can do bipartisan things. And then the bipartisan things they do are kind of trivial. They don't really do anything. Zoe Lofgren's a far left person from California, but she believes in the First Amendment. Frankly, a lot of the Democrats these days don't stand up for the First Amendment. I'd be glad to work with Zoe, and I have, on keeping Americans' data private and not be sold to people who buy it on the open market so that they can intrude on their lives.
Only a few seconds left, but what about that situation you brought up? What if a Democratic governor says to you as a Republican Attorney General, I don't want you defending that law in court? What happens then?
I'd say, Governor, it's the law. I'm going to defend all the law. He doesn't have the authority. That's what the Attorney General gets to decide. And I can tell you, that's one value that we're going to restore. We're going to restore law and order. We're going to restore reverence for law.
Fair enough. Thanks for joining us tonight. We want to remind you that if you prefer to get this show as a podcast, you can listen in your car or anywhere. You can find it wherever you get podcasts by searching Swing Set. See you next time.